Hello, welcome. This is Sean Russi. This is Sports Business Insider, powered by Sideline Sports, with my co-host Jay. We're going to be talking about NFL free agency today, covering a couple topics: restructured contracts, cutting and trading players, specifically what the effects are in cap space, why teams do this, what advantages it gives to teams, and kind of how that's gone over the years as teams have utilized those tools. The first thing we're going to cut on, or is touch on is full restructures. Full restructures is actually when a team goes to the player and asks them to take a pay cut for the coming season. Teams will do this in effort, obviously, to save cap, but usually with a player that's performed below his market value. Joe Mixon is a good example of this at 23, and the running back free agency market was kind of flooded. So he agreed to take his pay cut versus being cut by the Bengals. Obviously, he's been traded since then, but he did take his pay cut to stay with the Bengals versus just being released. The other way the teams have done restructures is also one of probably the Patriot way of things that we've seen in the past with Tom Brady, is what the Chiefs are now doing with Patrick Mahomes. Is pretty much every year restructuring his P5 salary, which is his base salary, which he would make, into signing bonus or a roster bonus to actually lower his cap numbers. So everybody sees these huge numbers in the news, but in actuality, his cap number is much lower than the 50 million he's going to supposedly make that year as his cap number.
Okay. And that's a move that I've seen happen. Is they actually will like kind of convert it into bonus money so they can free up the space. Because people in general, I know I read a long time ago that if you have a good enough agent, right, it's not about how much total money is on the contract. It's about the guaranteed money, because at any given time they can cut you, right, and then that's it. Then once they cut you, they don't have to pay you. But the guaranteed money, they do have to pay you. So can you shed a little bit light on that scenario?
Yeah, that's how they kind of do the restructures, is based on the guaranteed money. Usually, that guaranteed money is roster bonuses that usually come into play June 1st. And what the Chiefs have usually done is Mahomes' roster bonus last year, I believe, was supposed to be 30 million. They converted 12 million of that into signing bonus, so they gave it to him immediately when the season ended. What happens then is they're then allowed to prorate that over 5 years, lowers his base salary by about 9 or 10 million. So now instead of a cap number of 35, 36 million, his cap number is now 24.8, and the Chiefs have enough money to go get another $10 million player.
Okay.
And I think what we've seen is, especially with the Patriots dynasty, the Chiefs dynasty, is the teams that take advantage of this continue to be successful because they're able to keep the teams together. So while they are paying out this money, the money still is going to count, but they're essentially kicking it down the road a little bit to be successful now, and they'll deal with it kind of when the rebuild, whenever it comes around, they'll deal with the dead money and the other issues it may create.
And that actually, it makes sense because they restructured this deal to free up that money. Then they recently just went and got Hollywood Brown.
Yep, and they also were able to sign Chris Jones, and everybody thought they were going to have to lose him because of Mahomes' cap number. Now, obviously, the jump in the salary cap also helped them keep Chris Jones.
Right.
But having the ability to continue to restructure a number that's so big, I believe this year they saved 21 million on Mahomes restructure. So when you can do that constantly and then just free that money up and go get a Chris Jones. Now, they lost the Darius Sneed. There's still some fine accounting where you have to give up something to keep something.
Right.
But when you can clear up 21 million almost every season because of a large cap number, it becomes a huge advantage until, God forbid, Mahomes gets hurt or retired. And that's when kicking the can come and catch a team. Because once a contract is void or a player is waived, all that deferred money is accelerated to the minute he's retired or that contract is waived.
Right.
I don't know if you remember, Jay, back in when free agency kind of first was around, but the late 90s, the 49ers had been dominant for a long time, and then they had to waive Steve Young, trade Jerry Rice, and that was because of continuing to defer contracts, and eventually the dead money and the cap hits were too much for them to swallow.
And with the speaking of deferred contracts, one of the bigger ones that got that got done in recent times was Shohei Ohtani's with the Dodgers, the $700 million deal, and he ended up deferring it. So, can you shed some light for the people and get them to understand how that works? Because this man is going to get paid for a really, 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 really long time.
Yeah, and it's something I think that it's around July 14th, the annual Bobby Bonilla payday.
But Bonilla Day,
It's
yep.
it's similar to that where the deferred money in that contract allowed him to be paid. I think his last payment is actually 2025. Um, but that's similar to what the Dodgers have now done with Otani. Whether he gets cut, they trade him. They've deferred that way down the road to keep his cap number low to enable them to keep this superstar team that they've created. Um, in baseball, it's a lot different because there's luxury tax. There's ways to go over the cap and be okay. Where football, you have to be under the cap by a certain date, or you've got to find a way to get there immediately.
Yeah.
I think that's where the two sports kind of differ. Is that luxury tax threshold allows teams to kind of, obviously depending on what market you're in, be a little more playful with the cap over there.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. Oh yeah. Sounds good. And that it's the best case scenario if you wish to keep a team going. People talk about championship windows being open, right? And that helps extend that window being open. It helps keep it open for however long because there's only so many teams that come across in history where that core three or that dynamic duo like just kind of stays together. The whole Patriot way of doing things. You mentioned the Patriot way. It's funny how the biggest contract Tom ever signed was the one off the football field when he signed that deal with Fox. But every single time that they wanted to pay, well, going back to the first time they wanted to really pay him, and he was like, "No, just go get me more players." And then that became the standard with Bill Belichick the whole time. And it's crazy how people wanted to blame Bill Belichick. It's like, well, it started with Tom Brady and it worked. He just continued it going. Tom Brady came up with that. He was the one that said, "Don't pay me so much. Use that money to go get other players."
Yep.
But it's great how you are actually seeing this go and translate onto other teams because you got the Chiefs dynasty right now, and you've had the 49ers one of the past. The Patriots run was immeasurable. You would think, right?
No. Yep.
And
And I
a
think
lot of it
the
was due to their ability to retain players.
Yeah, and I like I said, the numbers were obviously smaller early in that dynasty, right? Quarterbacks were not up to 40, 50 million a year. Tom Brady making 15, 20 was huge in 2006.
Yeah,
Um, but even then they were converting 10, 12 million, and all of a sudden Tom Brady's cap number is 2 or 3 million. And people aren't, well, how is his cap? Well, they just paid him at the beginning of the year, and then
yeah,
they deferred it down the road and down the road. And that's kind of what you see now is they're going through some struggles, and it's not only because Brady left, and obviously other things have happened there, but they had to kind of go through a fresh rebuild and let the salary cap also kind of reset there with all the deferred contract they did do, because it wasn't just Brady. They were restructuring, Gronk and all the stars they've had there, that they were able to keep together for so long. McGinnis. And I think that's just an example of what the Chiefs have looked at in terms of how you keep a team together in the salary cap era. It's really one of the only ways is to do the restructure.
right.
One of the other ways they do it is these void years, which are essentially dummy seasons. And I think again, what the public sees is, oh, this player got a 2-year deal, but then he got cut after year one. It's because year two was actually a dummy year just for the team to spread out the cap hit and not have a huge hit in year one.
Right.
Um, and I think comparison when you talk about the Patriots and the Chiefs, one of the things that I see is, the Patriots always had kind of an okay receiving core, and you see that now with the Chiefs. They're able to pay other positions, but they kind of let Mahomes make work with the receiving core, kind of like they did with Brady, other than Gronk and Kelsey being consistent every year in and out threats. They let that kind of piece of the roster be the low end of the cap number per se.
Yeah. Okay. And with the oh, there was something I was going to. It was on. Oh yeah. Okay. So can you actually expand more on the whole void years?
Yeah, and one of the perfect examples is the recent Leonard Floyd signing. It's a 2-year deal on paper, but what the deal actually is, it's a 1-year deal with 3 void years. So what happens with those void years at the end of the season, the Niners will have a decision to either cut him or extend him. If they cut him, that 3-year cap hit all gets accelerated to next season, 2025, immediately the day they cut him. If they extend him, that can continues to get deferred for a little bit longer, and they'll probably tack on another void year.
Okay.
As you can have a maximum of 5 years total on the contract. So if there's 2 signed years, you can have 3 void years. If there's 1 signed year, you could have 4. But again, it's a way for these playoff teams, especially, to kind of circumvent some of the cap number and decide, okay, we've got a 1 or 2 year window here left. We're going to specifically keep this guy for 1 year. If he does really well, we'll probably extend him. And if not, we'll just take the hit next year as dead money.
Okay.
And dead money refers to, money that's on the cap, but the player is now playing somewhere else, or he's, just no longer on your roster in some fashion.
Okay.
So next year, I believe Leonard Floyd's dead money hit, if they don't extend him, is about $8 million.
Okay.
So it's not a huge number, but again, it's $8 million you can't give to someone else if you decide Leonard Floyd wasn't your guy this year.
Yeah.
Obviously, what the Niners are doing, they've got their quarterback. They've got to position themselves to pay Purdy next year. So I think that's why you've seen in free agency, essentially all the Niners guys they've signed have been 1 or 2 year deals, because I think they see that as their big window to keep the superstars around, is 1 or 2 years. And you can add little pieces here or there. And then they'll deal with Purdy's number, and they'll deal with all this dead money that they could potentially be seeing, 2025.
Okay. And now as far as the dead money, and it was in the liner notes, because that's money that you said they can't pay anybody else, even though the player's gone. And Kirk Cousins has 28.5 million, even though he's with the Falcons. But that's 28.5 million that the Vikings can't pay somebody.
Correct. And Cousins' number would have been huge anyways, even if they re-signed him. But the Vikings did what a lot of teams have done to lower Cousins' cap number last year. They added some void years, but his number was so large. The void years combined to a 28.5 million hit if it accelerated. So if the Vikings have kept him and extended him, that dead money hit would have been less, and it would have been down the road. But because they decided to move on from Cousins, all that money accelerates. They take it now. It's done with after this year. And you've seen what they've done in free agency is they've kind of been bargain hunting. And that's because of the 28.5 million in dead money. But they've done a good job, digging up the free agents that they've done. It looks like they're going to have a solid team with Sam Darnold there. But it's you'll see teams do that now. They're not taking an off year, but you're not going to write up the Vikings as Super Bowl contenders. Maybe they'll flirt with a wild card, and they'll probably go find a quarterback in the draft.
Yeah. And Kirk Cousins, he seemingly made the most. And I mean, like going back to his first, because wasn't his first deal with the Vikings something like guaranteed, like 3 year, 84 million?
Yeah, the signing bonus was huge. And what teams have to do is they have to put that money away immediately in their savings account to guarantee he's going to get that money, even if it's through restructures down the line. They've got to lock that money up immediately whenever they give that guaranteed money out. And he, his number has been huge forever. Even going back to his days with the Commanders, when they kept tagging him and it was getting out of control. And that's how he ended up on Minnesota, is because the franchise tag got so high, and they couldn't reach terms and they had to let him go. But for Cousins, and he's a great player. He's obviously probably been a little overpaid for this, the what he's produced playoff wise.
Right.
And go ahead.
I'm sorry. I was gonna say. Oh yeah, I was gonna say, man. Isn't it funny how back in the late '80s, a $1 or $2 million contract was like the highest in the sport, and now it's like a 1 year prove it deal. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, and I don't think anybody's shocked anymore. Especially we've seen Mahomes crack the 500 million mark. I assume Purdy is going to be in that $300-400 million range as the market dictates how the next guy's going to get paid. And you see these. I think you just get used to seeing these huge numbers, and then you see a guy sign on a 2-year, $20 million deal, and you're like, oh, that's nothing.
Yeah. Knowing full well in the mid 90s, like a $20-30 million deal, like you're the highest paid in sports. I think that was one time, I think one of Barry Bonds' contracts, I think the first one when he signed to the Giants from Pittsburgh was something like 35 million. And at the time, it was the highest contract in sports.
Yeah, no, the numbers have ballooned. The TV contracts obviously help the cap go up every year. We saw another huge increase in the NFL cap this year thanks to TV deals. You probably see another, generous increase next year. And it's still, it's still funny to see some teams be way over the cap, even with these increases and it's because of what we've discussed here. All the dead money. The Saints are a great example with the Drew Brees dead money and what they had to do there. They were like, I think last year they were negative 32 million under the cap to start free agency. So even with these huge increases, teams struggle sometimes to do the math and keep a squad together. And I think that kind of leads to the point. You see these teams that have used the restructures. 77% of the teams that do use the restructures make the playoffs. 54% of the teams do that are not using it. And 54% of the teams utilizing it have returned to the playoffs in back-to-back seasons. The teams not using it, 66% of them don't make the playoffs, and then 40% of them don't make the playoffs the next year. And obviously, there's reasons to do that. Like if you're the Giants with David Carr, you're not talking about a restructure right now. You'll suffer for a little bit, and you'll spend money later. Versus the Chiefs, there's all the incentive in the world to do a huge restructure on Mahomes or Kelsey or whoever it may be in order to keep that team together.
Yep.
But it does show that the consistency is there in terms of those teams returning to the playoffs.
Okay, and then that's what I was going to say. The franchise tag, because you mentioned how they kept franchise tagging Cousins, and so. With everybody, and this is just for you to inform the public, let them know how that works whenever they keep franchising, because the same thing happened with Le'Veon Bell. It happens with a lot of players. The more you franchise, the higher that tag goes up until eventually they can't pay you anymore, at least not without a big deal.
Yeah, it's always based, on the top 5, top 10 at the position. I believe the first time is top 10, the second time is top 5, and it's the average salary. And then you also have the penalty for tagging the player the second time. So you already have the average salary of, say, a quarterback, which was like 35, and then you had another penalty for tagging him a second time. Now all of a sudden his number is going to be 50 million for one season, and that's at that time I believe when Cousins' number was going to be that, I believe that would have been about 48% of Washington's cap. You would have had no real team on the field.
Exactly.
I believe the cap in those years was about 122, 132, somewhere around there. But so I think you see it with the Cowboys and Prescott. They did the short-term 3-year extension instead of doing the tag, and now they're talking about they're not going to reach terms on another extension. And I don't think that Dak is someone they'll tag next year just based on the average quarterback salary. That would be another huge number.
Yeah.
I don't think he'll necessarily hit free agency, but it's hard to tag quarterbacks now with the numbers getting so large because the numbers are based on the base salary. It doesn't mean it doesn't matter if a team goes restructures a guy. It's based on the original base salary. So when and that salary obviously starts with Mahomes and Jackson and all the guys making 30, 40 million per year, their original, on the original contract before restructures. You look at that, and it's tough sometimes for these other teams to even use a franchise tag on that position, and that's why I think you see them used more on safeties and defensive backs. Even the defensive end position is getting a little expensive to franchise tag.
That one there most definitely. So with all of this money, considering the cap space, dead money, and everything like that. Whenever players get drafted, because you got to pay them too, and I'm not talking about a few years into the league and they then it's like, all right, they kind of earned their extension. I mean, right out of the draft, because isn't it something like first rounders? They only see a couple of million, and then the number just kind of goes down from there.
Yeah, and it's all slotted, so the number is pretty much determined outside of really the signing bonus. And they really just look at last year, and there's a slight increase, and that's kind of how each draft, kind of goes now. Is the top guy got a little bit more than last year's top guy. But as you get to rounds 3, 4, and 5, especially, and then once you get outside of round 5, it's really you're seeing a bunch of guys get minimum salary with a small signing bonus.
Okay.
And those what's in the cap that's already built in though. So even if a team is over the cap or and having to get under it, their draft cap is already built into their number for the year. So that's one thing teams don't necessarily have to concern themselves with, but that is why some teams you'll see them stock up on draft picks, and then all of a sudden kind of like the Patriots they would just get rid of them for the next season, and then the next season, and then the next season, because they they want to lower that draft cap number to be like we can't keep all these guys. Obviously we've got a dynasty going on here.
Yeah.
But New England was notorious for always having 8, 9, 10, 11 picks, but then they were also being notorious for trading back and trading out to next year, and all of a sudden they had 6 or 7 picks that draft.
Yeah. Yeah. They always stay with picks in the tank. I mean, shoot, like look at the Texans and what they've been doing, and what just the Deshaun Watson trade actually helped out a lot. But with Watson's contract, the what well now Mahomes is bigger, but I mean this one right here, Watson was fully guaranteed. He's fully guaranteed that money,
Yeah,
So
and
now
that's kind of it's funny you bring him up because it's kind of like the Russell Wilson deal where Denver just released him, and his dead money is the largest dead money hit ever in NFL history.
like
That's
87
kind
million,
of
something like that.
88, I think 85, 86 million, somewhere in there. But that's what Cleveland is staring in the face right now. Is you've given him all this guaranteed money, so you can restructure and do all this stuff. But if you cut him, you're looking at a huge dead money hit because you gave him all this guaranteed money. And it'd be a dead money hit for years. It's throughout the length of the rest of the contract. Um, they Denver, decided to eat Wilson's hit instead of doing the post June 1. They reached terms where Wilson's hit this year is 53 and next year it's 32.
Mm-hmm.
Typically, it would either be all in one season or post June 1. Teams are allowed to split it over the 2 seasons. But Denver reached an outside agreement that the NFL obviously approved, where Wilson's dead money this year is $53 million. So even with the cap where it's at, when you take dead money like that, you're talking about taking 4, 5, 6, maybe 7 players off the field, depending how you're divvying out those average salaries.
Okay.
And I think that's what Cleveland's kind of staring at with Watson, because I don't think at this point, with what happened last year, you can be comfortable with the situation. Now, obviously, he could bounce back this year, and Cleveland could be, very happy with, or with what they've done. But I think it's a situation where they're just kind of have to sit on him for a little bit, or at one point, if the team starts falling apart, or if guys start leaving in free agency and they're no longer a consistent playoff threat, I think at that point, then they start thinking about, okay, maybe we take this $50-60 million dead hit, take this year, have a top pick next year, and kind of start this thing over.
Okay. And so with it's weird because it's like if this thing doesn't work out with Watson, it's like how do you start over? Like that.
And that's what I think. It's what Denver is staring at right now. They went out and jumped for Wilson to kind of hopefully re-energize that franchise, and kind of realize whether it was the coach pairing with the quarterback or whether Wilson is losing a step. That's debatable, but obviously the results were not what they expected.
So far, it hasn't been.
And I think that's kind of what you're staring at with Cleveland is, okay, how long do we deal with this? Especially, like I said, if you have another injury this year that takes you out from week 8 and you're done for the season, and all the other hoopla that comes with Deshaun Watson. How long do you want to do it for?
Yeah, totally agreed. Well, so last thing, real quick, the June 1 deadline. Talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, and so this is one of these other tools teams get to use to kind of not take a big hit if they're going to cut a player. One of the guys that was designated June 1st early this year was Eric Armstead once the Niners and him couldn't come to an agreement on a pay cut. And what that does for the team is allows them to split the cap hit over 2 years versus taking the dead money hit all in one season. I believe Armstead was due 17 guaranteed, and they would have had that all in one season. Instead, it's split over two. It's about 8.5, 9 each season now in dead money, and that's the same thing with players getting traded after June 1st. It's so the team can split any dead money over the next 2 seasons versus trading them first thing in free agency or even during the draft, and then not having them having that dead money all done this season and essentially buying a player, but it's just a dead money cap hit.
Okay. All right then. Well, that's all we got time for. This has been this has been the Insider. Tell them who you are and where they can find you.
No, I appreciate it, Jay. Again, this is Sean Russi, NFL and MLB agent. Thanks for joining us here on the show powered by Sideline Sports. You can find me on Instagram on my full name, Sean-Russi, and also follow us on LinkedIn and Twitter under Sideline Sports.
All right. Signing off. We'll see you all next time.